series of instructional videos that I've put together for my English 2 class here at Carbondale High School. We're going to talk today about using quotes. Mostly this deals with using quotes in essays, but we'll do it in not necessarily an essay form, but just in general about talking about how to use them, properly cite them, and that sort of thing today. Just a brief reminder, make sure you have your guided notes out and ready as you watch the video. Pause me to write down notes and questions. That's the whole point of this. Remember, we talked about the flip model the other day. You guys are in charge. So pause me to write down things. Pause me to practice. When I ask you to practice or ask you a question, pause me, take a moment, think about it for a second, and then come back and join me again. Okay? So with that being said, let's move in and talk a little bit about using quotes in your writing and in essays. So I called this "Don't Quote Me on This," but I do want you to think about quotes in this. Obviously, these are some guidelines that we'll use in this class. Okay, what are some important things to consider when using quotes in an essay? I'm going to argue that there are 4 things that you need to worry about when using quotes in this class. Again, whether that's in an essay or not. The 4 things are context, the quote itself, a citation, and a commentary section. Okay, and we'll talk about these individually here as we go along, but make sure that you have note of those 4 things. You might already know those words, you might know them in a different format, but we'll explain them right now. What's wrong with the following context of this quote? Read that quote over and see if you can figure out what is wrong with the context of that quote. Well, the actual problem is that Theodore Roosevelt isn't really given any authority. He doesn't really have any credibility for saying what he's saying, right? Now, obviously the quote isn't exactly, moving or anything like that, but we still need to give him credit and explain who he is. And so that's what we mean by authority, okay? Authority and context are who said what, and why we care. All right, in analytical or research writings, it gives us some credibility. It gives them a sense of importance. Why do we care who they are? Okay, so in terms of this, Bill Clinton becomes former president of the United States, Bill Clinton. Mr. Dunn becomes, more important than he already is. How might you provide context for a quote by Mr. Dunn? What might you add next to my name? Hopefully you said something like Mr. Dunn, English teacher at CCHS, or English teacher Mr. Dunn, or CCHS English teacher Mr. Dunn, right? All of those would give me some sense of authority for using a quote about, using quotes. How about that? Rules for quotes themselves. You remember that you need to copy quotes word for word, right? So we're talking about essential pieces of information, and those are word for word. You're going to enclose that quote in quotation marks. You're going to use an ellipsis, is what we call those dots, to skip non-essential information. You can do that. Just make sure that when you do that, you're still got word for word. You can just leave some stuff out, okay, in between. And then lastly, block quotes require separate indentation. You don't have to worry about that right now. Think about citations now for a second. Is the following citation here done correctly? Yes or no? Actually, it's not done correctly, and here's why. Citations only need to include the author's last name and the page number in parentheses. Nothing else should be involved there. The period that comes at the end of the sentence still goes at the end of the sentence. Just make sure it goes after that last parenthesis mark. Okay? So we've got our 2 parentheses with our author's last name and the page number, and that period goes on the outside. Commentary comes after the quote. And commentary, as you see these gentlemen discussing, talks about ideas, right? And usually those ideas help to explain something. So they explain the previous quote in terms of its meaning or importance. They elaborate on the quote or add on to the quote. Finally, they connect the quote to the thesis of the essay. In our terms, they'll connect it to maybe the most important idea, how it connects. Explanation is what you're thinking of in commentary. Okay? So does the following quote, or the following commentary, I should say, that comes after the quote, after the citation, do you think that it elaborates on or explains the preceding quote? Actually, you'll see this word also here. Ooh, also helps to let us know that it's going to elaborate on it, right? It's going to go a little bit further in explaining. So I guess there's an essence of explanation, but really it's elaborating. It's explaining further. Okay. A couple more important notes. Try to avoid awkward intros and outro phrases like "here's an example of this" or "one quote that I found to explain this was." Those get in the way of good context. Don't overuse "for example" or "for instance" in those situations. And then lastly, if you mention the author's name in the context of the quote, you don't need to include it in the citation after the quote. So Yoko Ono, the director of tourism for Tokyo, states that after this episode aired, American tourism jumped to Japan by 79.3%. Notice that we don't have Ono here in parentheses in the citation afterwards because we've already included her in that sentence there. Okay, bring these notes with you to class tomorrow. We'll do a little bit more work with formatting quotes then. We'll see you then.